Okay, we've spent most of the time here on the Middle East. We haven't gotten to Asia, so if any of you have any questions about U.S. interests in Asia, I'd be happy to hear from you. Jane Harmon, are you raising your hand?
I was.
Yeah. We need I'm sorry. We do need microphones. Thank you.
Okay, so as the first head of the Wilson Center, who happens to be a woman, I thought I'd point out that we do have women leading our programs, many of them, and leading this institution, not on this podium, but hey, I introduced it by asking whether we had lost our narrative as a country. And I think it influences the poll, and it influences our actions in the Middle East, but also in Asia and everywhere. I mean, the poll showed more interest in Asia than in the Middle East. But my short question to everyone is, and this is sort of what Mike Hayden said about the long game, the deep game. Have we lost our narrative about what the intersection of our actions and interests is? Are we almost totally transactional now without a view of how people see us and where we want to be in 5 or 10 years? And does that affect U.S. security?
Yeah, I'll be very brief, Jane. We've been a nation at war for 11 years. I'll just take a narrow slice, what Phil and I used to do. That drives you to an incredible emphasis on present tense operational activities, because frankly, that's what everyone in the room will measure you on when they go home from work that day. Did you keep them safe that day? So there are great pressures because of the pace of conflict that the security establishment gets very near term as opposed to long term. I'll make one additional point too, and it's not meant as a criticism, meant only as an observation. I looked at the numbers for Iraq and Afghanistan. They're almost identical in the surveys. Those are two very different wars. And it's quite surprising that the numbers are so identical, and they reflect, I think, nothing but fatigue and weariness. And frankly, the fact that the president has other priorities. The president has chosen to put his personal prestige and his personal political influence in other largely domestic issues as opposed to foreign issues. And so if we're going to have a long-term narrative, it will require some very powerful leadership from the top to keep American attention focused on these longish-term international questions, as opposed to, frankly, very tactical questions: who gets to pick targets, being one that was popular a month or two back, and only domestic questions. So I think you've got both things going: operations tempo, and frankly, a president who is conflicted because of the great domestic crisis he has to face.
And at a time of tremendous political polarization. Yeah. Let's go right here, sir.
Well, my name is Stephen Shore. You asked a question about Asia, so I'll give you one. There's always the possibility that North Korea could go the DDR route, and we could be faced with an implosion of the nation state and people wanting to get out, or China having to settle for, and other countries having to settle for Korean unification. So how likely is the implosion of North Korea over the next 4 years?
You've probably,
Sure.
You have the most recent stuff on that.
I'll be real quick. If it happens overnight, I'll be on CNN tomorrow telling you how inevitable it was. I mean, all the pieces are in place. So it's I served in Korea last 97 and 99. It was inevitable then too. They certainly wouldn't be able to last another decade, and yet there they are. I think the long-term problem is, number one, the current situation is unsustainable for the long term, but China, and that's the most important actor here, China does not want to face the consequences of change and would much rather keep handing out aspirins to make the pain go away than to deal with the core illness. And until the present tense becomes intolerable to China, I think we bump along here bottom dragging.
Phil, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that's right. I mean, as an analyst, you look at the characteristics of any problem to try to get away from intuition, which is the enemy of all analysts, I think. And the characteristics here, as the general said, 10 years ago, you would have said, okay, poor people. Every piece of it tells you you're going to implode. So it's hard to see this scenario in 10 years, but I don't know what the breaking point is. I do remember, to close, going on Al Jazeera And somebody asking me, it was a call-in show, which was a mistake, but somebody asking me, former CIA guy in Al Jazeera, somebody asking me, why didn't the CIA know about the movement, the revolution in Egypt? And I said, well, who could we have hired to tell us? And the same holds true for North Korea. The characteristics like Egypt are there. I just know if an analyst tells you he knows, or she, I would fire that analyst. That's the only thing I'd tell you.
Ma'am.
I'm Mitzi Worth. I'm with the Naval Postgraduate School. I want to ask some words about the narrative, because I think the question of national security versus foreign policy gets sort of blurred. And in fact, I think our national security is wound up in our domestic problems, our economy, water, food, education. How do you develop a language that we can educate the public that they will understand, so it doesn't become caught up with being right or left or red or blue, and understanding what the parameters are and what we're actually saying?
I don't agree. The public doesn't need to be educated. We do in this town. The public has decided very simple things. This is a country that gave with the Marshall Plan, that was a beacon for democracy, and now we're seen as people who in the 60s intervened in a place we weren't wanted and where we didn't have a national security interest. Whether you agree or not, most people perceive that we did this in Iraq. And it's the American people who have said, we don't like what you guys say as you apply your foreign policy domino theory ideas to the world. Why don't you do what we elected you to do, which is to build jobs, educate kids, reduce violence, and don't go overseas like isolationists we've been for 250 years unless you really, really have to. So we got to learn, not them, I think.
How do we make that happen?
Talk to them.
If you think about it, the Middle East, on the narrative issue, I think the president had a distinct narrative. I think he lost the narrative, and it's become reflexive. By defending himself and by bowing to much of what the opposition wanted, there's no daylight really between his position on many issues, the way he'd articulate them, and the other side. But on issues that involve stuff I think about, in the last 2 years we had Park 51, we had Muslims taking loyalty oaths, we had anti-Sharia legislation, we have and on and on. And the result is, when we're looking at the numbers, the partisan, this has become gay marriage. Stuff dealing with the Arab, you note that many of the issues that you're looking at there's no real partisan divide until you get to the Middle East and get to issues involving Islam. Then the partisan divide opens up huge. And it's a tragedy. So I agree with you. The public has kind of figured it out, but the public has figured it out because that's what they're reacting to, what they've gotten. And they haven't gotten a whole lot that's intelligible from us here in those who shaped the debate. And if the big distinction between Democrats and Republicans is going to be God in Jerusalem, then, God save us all.
Ma'am. Hi. Wait, I'm going to go to her first. Yeah.
Okay. My name is Yasmin Saidhani, Egyptian journalist and a fellow scholar at the Middle East program in the Wilson Center. First of all, thank you very, very much for this very interesting discussion. I actually have two questions, and I'll start by the one regarding Asia. Do you think that the global economy crisis is restructuring the world order currently or not? The second question is regarding, of course, the political developments in Egypt. Do you think that the political developments in Egypt is on the long run in favor of the American interest in the Middle East or not? And how do you perceive the Muslim Brotherhood stance towards Israel? And especially reading the possible future cooperation or miscooperation after the Sinai issue. Thank you very much.
Jim, do you want to?
On the first one, beginning with Dubai ports was the first time that we saw in polling we did across the Middle East, people beginning to look east for investment. It was safe and smart. And when then Crown Prince Abdullah took his delegation to India and China, almost immediately thereafter, and almost in response to that, the message got sent. And every year we poll, more and more people in the Arab world, businessmen and government elites, are looking to the BRIC countries as safe place of investment. America still is the security guarantor vis-a-vis Iran, which gives way, I think, to some weird and interesting conspiracy theories. They went into Iraq in order to destroy it and bring Iran in to make us weak and vulnerable so that they'd be able to sell us weapons and, you know, that kind of thing. But that's how it played out. America's the security guarantor, but in terms of investment, in terms of growth, in terms of the future, not unlike the polling that you found about Americans looking, China eclipsing Europe, in the Middle East, China and the BRIC countries are eclipsing the United States as the place to look for 5-10 years down the road in investment opportunities.
Teresita Schaefer.
Thank you. Tazy Schaefer from Brookings. I'm going to give you some Asia.
Good.
The polling reveals a rather happy face attitude towards the rise of China, particularly in the younger groups. And my working assumption, without having read the full report, is that this reflects in part the fact that there's such a lively business relationship, and there's some ambivalence about that. But looking more broadly at the economic plus political plus security dimension, what is the kind of structure of relationships in Asia that we need to put in place in order to make the happy face materialize at the end of a decade or two? The administration has been rather carefully saying it's putting India into that mix, which makes sense to me. How do you feel about it? Where do the other larger countries in the Asian region fit in?
When you're talking about India and you're talking about China and you're talking about Pakistan, you're talking about countries that are rivals of each other. So that makes that question all the more challenging.
When I talk about this publicly, one of the first things I say is China's not an enemy of the United States. There are no good reasons for China to be an enemy of the United States. There are logical, non-heroic policy choices available to Washington and Beijing that keep the relationship competitive, occasionally confrontational, never conflictual. And I also point out that, number one, with regard to the rise of China, as Phil suggested, it just is. Doesn't have to be good, doesn't have to be bad, it just is. And I actually fret from time to time more about Chinese failure as opposed to success, and Chinese weakness as opposed to Chinese strength. And so if you're asking me for a policy prescription, rich engagement across the board with standards, and I would, for example, make Chinese cyber behavior part of the overall relationship with costs and benefits to be derived, while at the same time quietly taking the cue from the other folks in the area, particularly in that second island ring, that welcome an American presence, and so as to make it more difficult for the Chinese in 5, 10, or 15 years to do something unfortunate for both countries.
Just to echo that, the business of America is business. It's not security. And so I look at, this is a Eurocentric country. There's 300 million plus people in the United States, 300 million plus in the EU, and we're heading toward 3 billion just with India and China, and then you start throwing in Pakistan, Bangladesh, et cetera. So I would sort of echo what the general says, and that is we've got tremendous economic interests here, and we ought to make it virtually impossible, not just for us, but for the Chinese to look at an adversarial relationship with us as anything but a huge business loss, I think.
Mm-hmm. Ma'am.
Thank you. Paulette Lee. I'm a communications consultant. I've been working in Africa. So my first quick question is, what happened to Africa?
Thank you.
But because I'm in communications, I'm particularly interested and very concerned about the responses that you got here, because they seem to me to reflect what I would call a news cycle. And I'm not clear on how folks who were questioned, if we know from where they're getting their information, how much do they know? Do they know that Saudi Arabia is a great friend but the seat of Wahhabism? Do they know about an Israel first policy? You know, what does this population know, and how are they getting their opinions? Thank you.
Jim, do you have a thought on that?
They don't know, but they vote. That's a bumper sticker. I don't know, and I vote. And that's a problem, I mean, to be sure. And to a great extent, the attitudes that we're talking about are shaped by the policy debate, or by weariness of the policy debate, or by my own interests, which somehow are disconnected from the policy debate. I think you spelled that out perfectly. But when my last book was focused just on exactly what we don't know about the Arab world, which actually filled a book, and then some. There was stuff on the cutting room floor, and it, in terms of having an intelligent debate, it creates enormous difficulty. And I believe that we get, we allow ourselves, therefore, to get suckered into problems like the Iraq War, because to me, the lie of Iraq wasn't the weapons of mass destruction. It was, it'll take 6 days and we're out of there. It's about less than 100,000 troops. It's going to cost us a couple $2 billion, and Iraqi oil money would kick in. There'll be flowers in the street. Democracy would bloom, et cetera, et cetera. We just had no clue what we were getting into. And those who want us to buy the same bill of goods on Syria aren't being able to get traction. Number one, no one in the political parties other than John McCain are echoing that, they are taking that line. But everyone else is being so hesitant that I think the public has caught hold and said, maybe we just don't know what to do here. And so, yeah, that's a problem, but we'll stay out. So sometimes the public is served by not getting informed, certainly not by not being misinformed, but other times by being misinformed when it's being written on a blank slate creates the problems that we've gotten into in the past. I think particularly in Iraq, and then some other issues in the broader Middle East as well.
Okay, there's a clock over here that's ticking down to 0, and as someone who spends a lot of time in a radio studio, I know what a down clock means. It means you have to get out by 0. But I just want to sort of quickly to wrap up here. It seems to me one of the takeaways from this discussion today is the need for us to develop a more coherent and stronger strategic narrative for the country. So I'm just wondering if we can just go down very quickly, each of you throw out sort of a final point that you would like to make in order to sort of advance us toward that goal.
Yeah, I'll end where I began, with the suggestion that all of our tools, all of our structures are built dealing with nation states and using hard power as our instrument. And both those realities are badly eroded in the world in which we find ourselves. So it's going to take an awful lot of retooling here in order to keep us safe and prosperous in the future.
I'd flip our security concepts on their head. I believe American power is driven by soft power. That is a perception, this is post-World War II, that we are the good guys who come in to help the underprivileged. It's what's on the tower when you go into New York. And that we have to understand that soft power is the most powerful form of projecting our national sort of will overseas, and then that's backed up occasionally or less frequently by hard power. But we separate the two like soft power is bad. I think soft power gives us the capability to do tremendous things. And lastly, that younger generation you're talking to who I think sees that.
I'd go back to President Obama's speech in Cairo, study it, figure out what went wrong in our ability to implement it, but use that as the narrative. It was beautifully structured, taught all the right lessons. I debated George Allen the day after on CBS, and at the end of the debate, the person said, but can he do it? Can he close the divide? And I said, I actually think he can if given a chance. I just don't think he can close the divide with conservatives here at home, and they're going to stand in the way of him doing it, and that's what happened.
All right, well, I'd like to thank our panelists, General Michael Hayden, former Director of CIA, Philip Mudd, Jim Zogby. I'd also like to thank Jane Harmon and the Woodrow Wilson Center and NPR and Gary Nell for promoting this discussion. If we're going to have a stronger narrative, these are the kind of fora, I think, that can advance that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.